It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up.
It's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, Valerie Grubb is here to discuss her new book, Clash of the Generations. Welcome to the podcast. I've got a great guest and a great topic for you today. As a generational speaker myself, I know that dealing with the new workplace can be a challenge for some. And while I keep hearing we have 5 generations in the workplace, I keep hearing that over and over, you really only need to concern yourself with 3. The oldest generation and the absolute youngest generation represent less than 1% of the workforce. Baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials are what we're really talking about. And while there really isn't much of a difference fundamentally because people are people, culturally, expectations have changed so much that this is where most of the conflict comes from. So our guest today, Valerie Grubb, has a new book called Clash of the Generations, Managing the New Workforce Reality, and she has generously donated 2 books to give away to 2 lucky listeners. The contest is simple. The first 2 people who email Craig at speakercraigprice.com and say, I want Valerie's book, gets them. Easy, right? Please be sure to include your email address. And also remember, this contest is restricted to the continental United States only. But hey, that's still 48 states. And I'm sorry, Hawaii and Alaska, but I can't afford to ship books to you guys because it's horribly expensive. And outside the country is a nightmare. This rewards my dedicated listeners. And of course, I wish everyone good luck. Let's get right to Clash of the Generations with Valerie Grubb. So with generations, let's just cut to the chase. Who's at fault? Is it the snot-nosed punks or is it the old farts?
I would probably say to that, Craig, that it's going to be, it depends on who you ask, right?
Oh, of course. That's why I'm asking you, because if I ask a snot-nosed punk, they're going to go, those old people are causing me problems, man. And if I ask the old people, well, these young whippersnappers don't have any respect, and they don't. So I'm asking the person who is, I want to say unbiased, but we all have biases, but I'm going to assume you're more or less unbiased opinion.
Yes, and I'm probably trying to approach it more about how we just have to understand. I always come back and when I'm coaching managers or talking about this with clients, who's at fault doesn't really matter. It is what it is. It's like being angry at bad weather. It is what it is. Get out and go about and do your life. Go about your life and do what it is that you need to do. And so, managing is really hard for any of us. And by the way, it's hard for those who've been managing for a while because the games and the rules have changed. The rules of the game have changed. So therefore, we're going to have to adjust our style, those of us who've been around a little longer. And by the way, those folks coming in, they've got to figure out how to manage me and how to manage people of their own age. So whose fault is it? I'm not sure that's helpful to spend time trying to figure that out. I think what matters when you're out there trying to lead a group of people to accomplish a project or leading a team, leading a department, it's more about the fact, what have I got to do right here, right now to get this group moving forward and get and accomplish what it is that we need to get done.
Yeah,
I think that's probably a more productive. The moment you're sort of figuring out fault, there's certainly a little bit of a chance that you've probably already lost the battle or you're going to lose it quickly.
And I find most differences are actually cultural versus generational. I find that it's older people complaining about stuff that they actually do and younger people, complaining about stuff they want to do. Then they're not being allowed to. So that's not really a generational thing. It's more everybody's doing it. It's just they're doing it in different ways.
Yeah, kind of approaching it differently based on their circumstances, right? And I think we can draw some generalities in, sort of generational type thing. But to your point, it also depends on who raised you and the parent, sort of what you were taught as you were growing up. If your parents were very, very involved in your everyday decisions, in your life, chances are you may expect more from me as a manager to kind of hold your hand. But if by the same token, your parents raised you and they were much more, really independent, really pushed you to be independent, pushed you to make decisions, then you're going to come back and bring that into the workforce. So you got to remember that you're overcoming 18 years, 24, 22 years. If somebody goes to college, that's what you're overcoming when somebody shows up in the workforce, is you're kind of overcoming that, how they grew up and what they've learned. And you're kind of having to take that experience and then come back and mentor and coach these new employees onto your expectations. And by the way, millennials are way different now. I mean, they've been in the workforce, 10 plus years. They are way different now than when they were 22 and entered the workforce. So, and I think that they're going to experience a little bit of the same challenges once they've got Gen Z. Now that Gen Z is coming in, you're going to kind of hear a little bit of the same thing that Gen X or Boomers kind of complained about millennials when they first showed up. And I think that go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I talk to folks all the time about generations as well, and I'm like, if you think about it, every generation has always complained about the other generations, because in the 60s, it was those lazy hippies, and in the 80s, then Generation X, we were slackers, and then...
Yeah, whiners.
Yeah,
Yep.
And so every generation does this, and when I was talking about how, is it a cultural difference or is it a generational difference, I get a lot of older folks going, oh, these kids today with their faces and their phones. And so I'll speak in front of an association and they'll complain about that. And then 5 minutes later, they're checking their email. So a 65-year-old a 65-year-old CEO is checking his email after complaining about people with their faces in their phones. But that's because everybody does it. They only recognize when younger people do it because it irritates them for some reason.
Yes, exactly. And you're absolutely right. I think that it's what we do. It's what everybody does. You just complain about that new generation because they require you to make changes in how you manage and how you go about your day-to-day life. And it's interesting. Don't you find it, Craig, that we kind of forget that chances are we were the exact same way? Like we were all eager and thought we knew everything and those, those, my manager who's 40 knows nothing or doesn't understand my plight.
Of course.
Exactly. So we were all that way at one point. And then the roles reverse as we, kind of grow up or not grow up, but as we grow older, our perspective on life changes, our perspective on what work means changes. And that's to be expected that there's going to be conflict because change is always tough. Change always makes everybody feel uncomfortable. And I think that it's really those companies and those managers that embrace that and understand that it's not one way or my way or the highway, that the company's going to be stronger and better off because guess what? They're going to be taking over your company someday. So get with it now. And adapt now so that you don't sort of waste precious years with turnover and other things. Get with it now on how to manage this group.
And my guest today is Valerie Grubb. She's got a great new book called Clash of the Generations, Managing the New Workplace Reality. And in fact, she has kindly and generously donated 2 books to give away. So we're going to do a little contest as far as if you can email Craig at speakercraigprice.com. The first 2 people who do so, because I don't like to do all these tricks and things. It's my dedicated listeners who are downloading it in the first hour when it comes out. If you email me, I will send you a brand new signed edition of Clash of the Generations. I find what your statement about the younger workers that Generation Y has now, the millennials have actually started to learn because they've been in there for 10 years. That's what every single person does. And so it's not unusual that they are learning new things and they're totally different than they were 10 years ago because nobody's the same as they were 10 years ago because if they are, there's problems.
Absolutely. And chances are you don't want that person, in your life and certainly not in your company. I mean, I think of the manager. So when I graduated college, 2 weeks after I was out, I was managing a 52 all-male union maintenance crew at a division of General Motors. I can assure you that I am a vastly different manager 20 years later than I was at 22, who just graduated. And the interesting thing to me is, as I think back at that experience, no one teaches you anymore. So I even think about it like these, millennials and Gen Z that are coming out that are being thrown directly into management positions. That's not unusual. Companies like to mix it up, bring in that fresh blood, bring in new leaders. But understand the companies aren't training people. No one trains anybody anymore on how to manage and how to lead. That you're expected that you're a great employee, you got great grades, or even if you're in corporate America for a while and then you get promoted, you're contributing it as an individual. And now I'm going to promote you and put you in charge of people, but I'm not going to come back and spend the time with you to talk to you about what it means to lead your peers, or the difference between sort of being one of the gang and now having to motivate and engage a group of employees that may or may not thought they were eligible for your job. So I think that that's kind of an interesting aspect as well, is that we expect, great grades or great individual performance to automatically translate over to being a great leader. And this is really more of a learned skill. This is not something that you're sort of come out of the womb understanding how to do, particularly because everybody's, as you said it, Craig, everybody's an individual. So yes, we can make generational or cultural, we can make these cultural guesses or expectations based on their culture or their generation, but it really is going to come down to what that means for me. And how do I, Val Grubb, how do you, Craig Price, want to be managed? And you can, yes, generations is going to kind of set you up with that, thinking about what it means in that generation. And a lot of those traits are going to work for me. But we still have to come back and have a conversation about what I need in order for you to get the best out of me that you can. Yeah. And so I think that that's a lot of it, that, really, yes, we're generational, yes, we're cultural, but we still come down to being individuals. And just like you said, we're also changing. So how you manage me today may not be the same way that you need to manage me in a year, based on whatever, you get married, you get divorced, you have kids, you move, you do all of these things. And so it's a constant learning curve and a constant adaptation of your management skills in order to get the best out of employees.
And you brought up a great point that I hear a lot from folks, especially older managers, is they're supposed to know these things. It's these unwritten rules that they're not taught because, guess what? They're unwritten. They're not in a textbook. They don't teach them in college, apparently. They don't teach them how to deal with life in an office. And so they are punished because of that. I think they unfairly being punished because they're supposed to know certain things that they've never been told.
Agreed. Could not agree more, because I even think about it. My last assistant at Oxygen Media, when I hired her, she had never worked before a day in her life. And I had a big presentation, sent it to her to have her make copies, get it ready. And the morning of, she comes walking in, she's got a Kinko's box. And I'm like, Kinko's? And she's like, oh, yes, I just went to Kinko's. They look beautiful. Look how gorgeous they are. And she didn't realize, and I know this is something we take for granted, she didn't realize that in corporations, we have copy machines. We have giant copy machines that, by the way, the mailroom could have handled this for you. And I was flabbergasted, and yet she's had brilliant grades. And I could come back and go, oh, how foolish is this young lady? instead, how I looked at that was I went, wow, she didn't know and she got the job done. That doesn't mean that I didn't rag on her a little bit, but more understanding of coming back and saying that level of dedication is exactly what you need to not forget ever. And now, gosh, it's been 9 years since Oxygen was sold and I left and went out on my own. And she's now an executive producer, has several documentaries under her belt. Like, she's an amazing, amazing employee. But had I stopped, like you suggested, Craig, had I stopped and said, wow, what a terrible employee. She doesn't know this. She doesn't like these are things that inherently we knew that she should have known. I could have brushed her off and looked at her in a negative fashion that would have been unproductive. So now, that whole experience told me that I need to, even small assumptions, I need to get out of that habit of doing that instead of looking at her attacking projects through my lens and through my experience. And it was a real learning curve when you're dealing with folks who, by no fault of their own, only through their parents who have the means and the ability that they don't have to work, and that they just lack experience. And you're right, college. That's not what college is for. That's not what high school is for. They're not teaching you real skills. They're teaching you book smarts, which can, or in most instances, doesn't translate over to getting a job done at Oxygen Media or at General Motors or any of the places that I have certainly worked at. They're just two very, very different things.
So my question would be, why are we putting younger workers in managerial positions? Is it certainly just because of the education? Is it because they're better negotiators than we are? Maybe they know how to negotiate to get to that job easier. They just don't have the skills to do them, or the experience. I should say they don't have the experience to do them.
Yeah, I think that could be. I also think that companies like to mix things up. I think that you're right, that there is this expectation. I think of even the advertising and marketing. Think about the big push that there is to, younger. And the thought is that that when you bring in sort of younger people, that it's going to give you a different perspective on how things are approached. And it's one of the things that I talk about that, when I had staff working for me and if they would have millennials working for them, it was, look, you can't just keep coming back and saying, no, we've already tried that. We've been there. We've done that. We've tried that before. Of course we thought of that. The key is let them. Look, if it was a problem, if they have an idea on how to solve a problem that, by the way, we also identified and we could not overcome it, fantastic. Let them re-look at it to see if through this fresh lens they can come in and solve the same problems that we thought were great ideas to solve as well. So I think that it's, you don't have that baggage of how you've always done things. I think of, any company that comes in, you have these great, incredibly new ideas, amazing new ideas, fabulous. Now let's come in. Let's look at, when Apple came out. When Apple came out with the Mac. When it first came out, those Macs cost a bunch of money for the first of those. They were really, really expensive. Now what do? Now, in a corporate environment, you come in and your goal then is to drive that to the lowest common denominator, to drive it for repetition so that you can get the most money out of it. So what you're teaching now, instead of idea generation or innovation, coming up with new ideas, now I'm coming back and rewarding employees for doing repetition as cheaply, as inexpensively, as quickly as possible. So understand that if you've got a bunch of years of that, a little bit of seasoning in that, there can be some question as to where do the new ideas come from? Is it from those folks who have been around, who we've kind of beat into submission and sort of beat them out of the innovation? Or is it those people who come in who we haven't had the time yet to sort of to really come in and indoctrinate them and teach them our culture and teach them how things are done. So I think that in many instances, I think it's this thought that companies that you can get, that sort of having these fresh ideas that you need to be, that could potentially come from someone who is fresh out of school, who, again, just doesn't have that baggage. Now, I think that that's erroneous. I think you can get away with that maybe in some positions, but if that is just your standard hiring practices, that every year you hire younger and younger managers in the attempt to thinking that is, that's what's going to keep your company fresh or have fresh ideas. I certainly think that that's going to come back to bite you, because, if you look at more seasoned workers, the largest generation that's producing entrepreneurs right now are 55 and older. So there's a lot of ideas out there. We just have to make sure that as managers and leaders that we're allowing employees of any age to come in and be able to present that in a manner that doesn't, kind of kill the people for coming up with ideas, even if they fail, right? I mean, anybody who's ever presented an idea that failed or was shot down, you look at that and you go, well, bag this. I'm not going to come back and I'm not going to stick my neck out and present some new idea, because it's going to be shot down. You only need to do that a couple times, and you're killing the innovation in your company, and you're killing those folks who have been in there for a longer period of time. So, back to your question, Craig, is I think that, yes, companies do it. They think that it may be mixing things up in hopes of sort of generating more ideas. I'm not exactly sure that I see that success. I mean, I think of myself as having, again, managing this maintenance team. I would be much better at managing this team now, at my age now, than I was at 22. I can tell you that. I would most definitely be better. And I think as far as ideas, one last thought, and forgive me, I'll stop, but I think of, someone like a Thomas Edison. What it's reputed that it took him 10,000 tries to make a light bulb, to build a light bulb. I'm sure he heard along the way people telling him that can't be done, that idea was stupid, what are you doing, why are you spending so much time on that? And bully for him for not stopping and continuing that work. That's not corporate America. You only got to tell people a couple of times that the idea is stupid, or the idea that's not going to go forward, or we can't do it like that. And then what's going to happen is you're just killing the enthusiasm from an employee at any age. And now you're going to get much more robotic processes so that nobody sticks their neck out. Nobody sort of wants to stand out.
Well, one of the things that with younger workers, innovation is one of the reasons they hire them, but also they're cheaper to hire. And when that happens, a lot of the older workers see younger workers as not eventual replacements, but as almost immediate replacements, like they're like breathing down their necks. So there's that factor of, it's really bottom line, money-wise. How can you reconcile that? Is it easier for a older manager to work with a millennial, or is it easier for a millennial to work with a more mature worker? Because I feel a lot of times the mature worker feels threatened just for the fact that younger people exist.
I definitely would not argue that point, Craig. I would not argue that point. And what I would say is that if your company has that, if the leadership has that perception that you are replaceable by somebody who's much cheaper and half your age or younger than you, it's going to be very difficult to get everybody to work together.
Oh, I don't think it's that blatant. I'm not sure it's that blatant. I think it's more of, it's almost like, and this is going to be going super harsh, but it's almost like racism, where it's not blatant. It's just a series of things that are happening that when you add it all up, this is not right.
Again, definitely, I still wouldn't argue with you. I don't disagree that it's not happening. I think that there is this perception. I think there can be this perception, depending on the company, that let's hire cheap. I certainly hear that from my friends who have let go, and if they're of a more seasoned in their careers, that it can be harder And I think that's correct. But I would also say that that's, as you move up in your career, as you get director to VP to EVP to SVP, whatever the chain is, it is harder to find a job because the pool does start to limit as your title goes up. I think it's the same in this instance and it's really a matter of really coming in and kind of showing your worth and what you bring to the table with the fact that you are more seasoned. Now, again, and I guess what I'd say, Craig, is look, if a company came back and said, well, I'm going to hire, 2 millennials to place instead of a Gen X or a boomer, do you really want to work for that company? I mean, if that's all they're looking for is somebody that's, a $30,000 employee or $60,000 or $80,000 instead of double that for somebody who is more senior, I don't know that that's a place that you're going to want to work anyway, because the culture's got to suck. So I think that if you certainly see that within a company, run, because it's not going to be the place that's really looking for the best ideas. They're not looking for who could best fill the job. They've got a bottom line number that they've got to fill, and it's not really going to be dependent upon the experience and what people can bring to the table. Now, if the position, again, it also just depends on the position. If this is a position that could be replaced by somebody at a junior level, then, who to come back and be the argument as long as the work is being done to the level that is expected and needed. You don't want to overhire and somebody be bored. So, because then they're going to leave anyway. So I think that it certainly requires companies to be cognizant of the fact that, what is really the expectations and the requirements of the job, and then hire to that, and don't sort of exclude or separate out anybody, segregate against anybody who may be slightly more years in. I just don't think that's the best approach for the job and for the company at hand. I think as a recruiter, you would certainly be doing a disservice to your company if you're consciously, trying to hire, 2 millennials for the price of 1 Gen X or 1 boomer. Don't know that you would certainly be doing the best for your company.
Well, we don't have too much more time left, but I wanted to have you look into the future, because right now about 1% of the workforce is Generation Z, I guess they call them now. I don't think they've really settled on a name yet, because there's still so few of them. But this Generation Z, they're just starting to get into the workforce. What can we expect from them? Is there any kind of shift are we seeing it getting further down the road, or is there a shift to counteract what we've been seeing?
I hate to say it, but I think I think whatever we had with the millennials, I think that's going to keep up. Because remember, it's the same people. It's the same, it's the Gen Xers, the boomers that have really brought the millennials in. They're coming in and they're still involved. They're still hardcore involved in their children's lives. So I don't really, and I expect with Gen Z that it's going to continue in the trend of whatever you saw with millennials, you better brace your boots, because I think that's just going to continue and going to get even more challenging if you are struggling with it now. It's not getting better, let's put it that way.
Well, once again, the book is Clash of the Generations, Managing the New Workplace Reality by Valerie Grubb. It's a fantastic book. You gave me 3 copies, 2 to give away. One I've been browsing through the last couple days. It's fantastic. I like it because it has case studies. It's not just speculation and theory. It's actual case studies, which is fantastic, because the younger generation's been in the workplace long enough to actually get them. So I appreciate that. So where can people find you and learn more about your book and more about what you do?
Yep. So my company website is Val Grubb and Associates. My book, Clash of the Generations, is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Any of your favorite bookstores will will have it. And you can also go to my website and find it there as well.
Well, Valerie, I certainly appreciate your time. And what I tell everybody at the end of my presentations when we talk about generations is, look, they're not going anywhere. We are. They're not living in our times. We're living in theirs. So you have to adapt or die. It's just that you can adapt without causing too much stress for yourself. So thank you very much, Valerie.
That's the show. Thanks to Valerie for her time and her 2 books. So email Craig at speakercraigprice.com saying you want Valerie's book, and the first 2 folks get them. Easy as pie. Sign up for the newsletter at realitycheckpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at realitycheckpod. And sure, why not? Go ahead and like the Facebook page. I'll see you next time.